This is June 10th, 2008, and we are interviewing Wyman Osterhout at the New Scotland Historical Association near Albany, New York. He served with the United States Marines from May 1951 to August 1952. This interview is being conducted by Ken and June Hunter. Please tell us your full name and when and where you were born.
Wyman E. Osterhout. I was born in Albany, New York in January of 1930. And what was the rest of it?
Oh, where were you born? Oh,
in
you
Albany,
said that.
yes, in
Okay.
the Albany Hospital.
All right. Now, what did you do before you entered the service?
I was in high school, got out of high school. I went to college in University of Alabama, and a lot of my friends were going into service, and so I left school and come home and joined the Marine Corps.
Now, so you joined mainly because your friends were all going in? And
I would say so, and at that time, I thought it was the thing to do. And, maybe after I got to Parris Island, I had some doubts of whether I made the right choice or not.
How did your family feel? Were they happy?
I don't think any families are ever happy. The war was still going on, but that's the way it was. And of course, was sent to Parris Island for my boot training.
How did you get to Parris Island from Albany?
I went on train, and then I forgot from where, but then wherever we got off the train, we were bussed into Parris Island itself. One of the things, I almost had a short career in the Marine Corps because when I was young I had rheumatic fever, and while in boot camp I had went to a sick bay, and for some reason, whatever, and they found on my records where I had had rheumatic fever, and the doctor was determined he was going to discharge me and send me home. I kept requesting to go back to my unit, and anyway, after so they sent me to Beaufort Hospital, and finally I found a doctor that did agree. He signed and let me go back, but instead of rejoining my outfit, I had to wait until another one was formed, and then to go back and be shaved, have my head all shaved again and go right through the same thing. But anyway, I did get through that, and then that was one thing else in Parris Island was kind of comical. I had a friend from Delmar. His name was Jerry Solomon. He was a good friend of mine, and he had went in, and after at the chow hall, I sneaked out around back to have a cigarette, which was like taking your life in your hands if they ever caught you. And while I was there, I see this guy with a hat pulled down over his eyes over there doing the same thing, and it was Jerry Solomon, and which was quite comical. And that was the last time I saw Jerry until we got discharged, and then we went away to school together again.
Well, what was basic training like at Parris Island?
Well, Parris Island wasn't my basic training. That's your boot camp, boot training, and that is. If you ask anyone that's been to Parris Island, they won't have too much good to say about it. I mean, it's pretty brutal. And but of course, I think that was the Marine Corps' way. I think they got their message across. You either did it their way or that's it. And so it wasn't too good. The basic training I did in Camp Pendleton, California, and that was before going to Korea.
So you did boot camp and then basic training?
Yes.
Okay.
And after boot camp, I was sent to Oceanside, California, where Camp Pendleton was, and there. And when I first arrived, I remember the first thing we did, we were sent out in the mountains to fight fires. So, you know, fires were burning back then, and we did that. While in basic training and Pendleton, another strange thing happened. I had pretty well completed my training, and I had volunteered for weapons company. They gave you a choice of a few different things you could be in. I went to weapons company, and then in weapons company I chose assault platoon, which involved training of demolitions, light machine guns, and flamethrowers. But I had accomplished that, and was more or less waiting to go overseas because that's where we were all going. And but I was put on mess duty, and while I was on mess duty, I ran across Duncan Rankin from Delmar, a friend of mine, and he was going on the next draft to Korea, and I wasn't scheduled for this. So I went to my commanding officer and asked if I could go on the next draft to go to Korea. The request was denied, and I was reprimanded for trying to get out of mess duty. And I never got over it. I said, but that was the way the
What
service
did you
is.
do on mess duty?
Well, as far as mess duty is concerned, I had a pretty good deal because I was assigned to the officers' mess, and I was in charge of it, so I had a lot of other guys doing most of the work, and basically had to order the food and just keep things clean and looking good for the officers coming into it. But
You
I had
didn't
to
have-
serve my full time at mess duty, and then I went on the next draft going to Korea. So.
Now, for your mess duty, did you have to peel a lot of potatoes or make the other guys peel?
Yeah, they
You know,
did,
you
yeah.
always hear that.
Yeah, I didn't have to do that, fortunately. It's just strange, but that's the way the service is. Any man that's been in the service knows, regardless of what branch, they do have some strange ways of doing things. And for me to think that they really gave me hell for trying to get out of mess duty instead of going to Korea to a war was kind of strange, but that's the way it was.
What was barracks life like?
Up there, excuse me. When we went to Parris Island, let's see, it was in the Carolinas, and I thought it'd be nice, but it was cold, real cold, and we slept in tents. And you slept with every bit of clothing you had, you slept in because it was that cold. A lot of guys got pneumonia at that time, and after we were there for some length of time, then we did get into barracks, but in the beginning it was intense. And Parris Island, to describe it as kind of, I mean, you know, it was every day. It was pretty rugged training. And
Tell us, what did you do? Did you have to run 10 miles?
well, I'll tell you when I did run 10 miles. Like you asked me earlier what my nickname was, and it was Cookie. And so that's fine. I'm in the Marine Corps. I'm down at Parris Island, and drill instructors are bad men. I mean, boy, they are tough. And I got a letter from a girl, and she addressed it to Private Cookie Osterhout, and if you don't think, I thought it was the end of the world for me. That drill instructor saw that and told all the rest of the troops, we have a cookie in our crew. And I did more running around the drill field. And I had a pack on, and I had to have my rifle over my head, and I had to say a certain saying all the way around, and I'm not going to tell you what that saying was, but I'll tell you, I said, if I survive this war, I'm going to find that girl when I get home, and I'm going to kill her. I never did find her when I got home, but. And so that's one other thing, Parris Island, they do send you out on a night patrol, and you have to go through a swamp, and it's pretty rough going. Well, after I was out, I had mentioned earlier Jerry Solomon, and he and I were both out of the service, but we read where they were going to court-martial some drill instructors because some of their troops, a couple of them had drowned in these swamps while in training. And we wrote letters in their defense saying that this was just part of the training that was necessary, because when you got to Korea you had to go through the same sort of thing, and that it really wasn't to the fault of the drill instructors, and as it was, they never did get court-martialed.
How was the food?
The
Parris
very
Island?
first night into Parris Island, and by this time you're scared to death, because when you get off that bus, when we got off that bus at Parris Island, and before, all the way down to this, it was kind of a fun thing. Oh, we were going to service. When we got off that bus, and these guys started hollering at us out there and calling us every stupid thing you can imagine. We were nothing but a bunch of dummies, and ran us through all of this, so on. And the first meal they served us was liver, and anything I can't stand was liver. And I'm looking at it, and I thought, if I don't eat it, they're going to take me out and shoot me. If I do eat it, I'm going to die at the table. And I remember there was these metal cups, and this one was whatever was forced in it, but didn't have anything in it. And I looked, and I put my liver under it and tipped the cup upside down and hoped that they never found out who did it. That was the first thing.
And you got away with it?
I did get away with that, yeah.
And you were rather hungry the rest of the night?
Didn't matter.
Oh.
And then they had you so scared. I mean, and the theory was, you probably have heard before, everybody gets their head shaved. So the theory of that was that I could have been a laborer, and the guy next to me could have been a banker's son, or he could have been very, very wealthy, but we all looked the same. And we were all dummies, and I mean, they let you know that you were a dummy. They didn't even call you by name. Or they did call you by a name. It was not your own name. So, but the whole theory was when you finally come out of there, and I thought I was kind of cocky going in. Boy, I wasn't when I come out. I mean, you know, it was good for you. It was good for you.
Did you have a lot of inspections?
Yes.
What were inspections like?
Terrible. Another way that they get their message across. You had to take your rifle, of course, and dismantle it. And you could do this in your barracks, but now we're in the barracks. And you had to dismantle it, and you had to clean it, and they didn't want to see a spot on it. And you put it all back together, and then you fell out for inspection, and you stood there, and the drill instructors would come down the line, take each piece and look at it. And this happened to me. He took mine, looked at it, and threw it down in the dirt and told me, you better go back and clean it. And I know there wasn't a spot of dirt on it. Well, I wasn't the only one he did it. He did this randomly. Boy, you'd go back and, you know. But that was part of the things they did. And you cleaned it. Shining your shoes, that was more or less after you got out of Parris Island, but that was a big thing that they had. They just had certain things that was going to be done, and you either did it or you didn't.
Do you know the penalty of, did anyone even try to go against the orders? Or
the only thing I witnessed was there were a couple of boys that just did not want to do the things they were supposed to do. And so they had ways. They had the two of them sent out at night. They sent them out on a detail to do something, but they had a bunch of the other fellows in that squad to be waiting for them, and they just beat them up real bad. And then when they went to, say, the chaplain or one up front, come back to the drill instructors, and they said they tripped over their locker box. And that's all there was to it. Everybody knew what happened to them, but I never saw them again. So they accomplished what they wanted and got out, but I don't know, you know. But they had
Now we heard the inspections here, part of the routine in various services, branches, was they would, if a quarter didn't bounce off the cot, you were in trouble.
Well, that's true. I don't remember actually having them bounce a quarter, but that was very true. I mean, your bunk had to be so neat and so right, and tucked and tight, and I think that was in every branch. Probably everybody went through that same thing.
And you were required to have spit and polish for inspections?
Oh yeah, oh yes.
Did you have regimental drills?
By regimental drills.
Parades?
Parades, no. Only time we had a parade was when we graduated from Parris Island. And then all of the platoons would parade past, I imagine, the commander. And as you went past the judge's stand, you turned around and saluted. And that was the only parade. Basically, as my part of being in the Marine Corps was boot camp, basic training, Korea, home, discharged, and out. I mean, when they say join the service and see the world, I didn't see much of it. And what I did see was not what you wanted to see. So I think you asked me during earlier, being in about a year and a half. When we joined the service, I mean everybody at the time, they gave you the option of joining for 3 years or you could join for an indefinite period and be released when the war was over. If the war was over before the 3 years, you could get out. If it wasn't, you had to stay in. Well, it was a decision to make, but my thought was I didn't want to have to count the days. You know, I just remember hearing from other guys saying, I've got a year and so many days, whatever. I thought, if I don't know when I'm going to get out, I don't have to worry about it. So I joined for the indefinite period. By doing this, they classified me as reserve, last category reserve, although I was never in the reserves. That benefited me by being, when I was in Korea, I think it was in May of '52, they passed something about law saying all reserves would be sent home from Korea. And I just fell in at the last part of that and was sent home.
Now we're getting a little ahead of that. After the basic training was completed, how did you get to Korea? Was there any other service interval in between before going there?
No, as soon as as soon as I had completed my training, basic training in Korea, this did bring up another thing. I did tell you about the mess duty and being turned down. Well, this was at that same time, and my friend Duncan Rankin went over in his draft. The next draft I was in, and I went over to Korea on a merchant marine ship. The main thing I can remember about that was down in the hole where you slept, the hammocks were like 6 high. So I didn't get seasick, but a lot of guys did. And boy, you didn't want to stick your head out from under your, I mean, it was, you know, that was the worst part about going over on the merchant marine ship. When I came home on a Navy ship, and it was a little bit better. But so I went on a merchant marine ship to Korea. We stopped in Kobe, Japan, and dropped off our sea bags and things that we wouldn't no longer need. And I think we had one night in Kobe, and then from there we went to Korea, and we landed at Incheon, but not during the invasion. But we were got off a ship and went down and got on landing barges, but we had no idea what was going to be in front of us. As it was, we hit the beach, and everything was all right. We moved around a lot in Korea to many different places, and one of the things that happened to me as I was at Panmunjom, outside of Panmunjom, and they were trying to get a peace treaty signed, but the fighting was still going on all around there, and somebody in Washington had decided to put out this memo to all troops that do not fire at the enemy unless he fires at you first, feeling that this is going to get to people. And here you are being shot at, and you're looking at this stupid, and the last thing I saw was a bunch of paper airplanes flying around everywhere. I mean, and if they, I mean, when you talk about hurting morale, that did more to hurt morale than anything, because now you're thinking, here we are over here, and these stupid guys in Washington are coming out with stuff like that. I mean, and you wonder, how can they even think about doing that? But that was one of the things there. The Koreans, you couldn't tell a North Korean from a South Korean, and I think if you interview any of the other fellows over there, will tell you the same thing. They all looked alike, and they all dressed alike. And one of the problems they had was infiltrating at night. And I think on that application, Joe, and I filled out, it said, did you have a certain guy in the Marines that was a friend of yours? This David Riddle and I, because we were in the assault between weapons company, the North Koreans were coming over, and most all of us were in bunkers, and at night when you were asleep, they were tossing grenades into bunkers, and a lot of Marines were getting killed right in their sleep in the bunkers. So they deployed Riddle and myself had to go out in front of the lines and to dismantle a trip flare that was out there. But I wrote that down. But anyway, he got temporarily blinded, and I had to bring him back, and so we remained good friends. Also on there was like, was there any certain things that you can remember? One of the worst things, and one of the things that stay with me even today, that I really hated was out between our lines and theirs, there was some Korean houses, and supposedly they were South Koreans, but nobody really knew. But we would be sent out on patrols, and we were to get the people out of the houses because they thought the North Koreans were coming in, and say throwing grenades and things into the bunkers at night, and then they could go back and stay in these houses, but we thought they were South Koreans, and then they could go on back. We were sent out, had to get the families out of these houses, and while they were standing there, there would be women and children, and usually old people staying with them, and then we had to burn the house down. And they would stand there and cry, you know, screaming, and it was awful, but it was what you had to do. Their house wasn't much, it was just a bamboo, straw roofs. For heat, they had like a hard mud floor, maybe like a clay, and outside they had a fireplace, and the fireplace was right down at ground level, and they built a fire in the fireplace, and the heat would go underneath the floor of the house. Those people, they were probably sent back to a detention wherever. I never did see them again, but I'll tell you, I really felt sorry for them.
Yeah. How did they, were those homes by the Koreans in like a little grouping, like a little village, and what they do for water? And
most of a lot of times, whatever I can remember was either near a river. There were a lot of rice paddies, and they were sometimes in groups. Sometimes you'd find them out by themselves, which that brings up another thing. I remember one of the fellas in our unit saying, until we got here, they never had roads, they didn't have bridges, and I remember saying to them, they didn't need roads and bridges. They were very happy. They had an oxen, they had their rice paddies, their life was content. And everything changed for them. I remember going along a trail, like I was by myself, and I came across an older man, Korean. I didn't know if he was South Korean, North Korean, but he was crying, and I tried to console him, and he just pushed me away. He didn't even want me to talk to him. And I thought later he must have just been so bitter over the whole thing.
You had mentioned that your duties involved demolition, light machine gun work, and flamethrowers. Did you have any occasions to use those skills?
Yeah, mostly was the flamethrower. And when I wasn't using those, I might just well have been in what they would call the infantry part, the riflemen, because if there wasn't an occasion to where they would call upon the assault platoon to go in and do these things, then I would be just a rifleman on the line. Probably the biggest thing, there was a place they called Lutz Castle, and it was up on a mountain, and all the Koreans were dug in there, and we were going to have a night raid to go up and try to get them out. They had artillery firing from behind us, and which, by the way, was strange that Duncan Rankin, that fellow I talked about from down there, he was in the artillery. And we trained with the flamethrowers, and you were quite clumsy with them. You couldn't maneuver very good, and I did carry a sidearm, but they usually sent some Marines around you to protect you. But we practiced different ones with flamethrowers. When your firing pins wore out, you didn't have any more material in your tanks, and somebody else did, or if another man went down, you could get his, put it on, and keep on going with it. They carried in your tanks was napalm, and when I was going to say gooks, they call them gooks, the North Koreans, would be in a bunker, and to try to shoot them or to do anything, all they were doing was firing out of a slit. You couldn't get to them, but if they could get us in with a flamethrower, we could come in from any side where they can't see us, and I could hit the back side of the bunker, and napalm just walked right around the whole thing, and it just went in, and they'd be suffocated. But mostly it was that. The demolitions, we did have to go out and put some explosives under certain bridges and certain things like that with that. The light machine gun, I did some, but I would say the most of my time was with the flamethrower.
You said you went out on patrol duty quite a few times. What was a patrol like? What was it made of?
They would usually take a squad of men out of the platoon, and most of the patrols, some are during the day, a lot of them are at night. And a lot of times you would encounter the enemy, and during the day your patrols were looking for any signs of the enemy had they been around or where they were. That's pretty much about the way the patrols were, but quite often you engaged in combat.
Now, what was the terrain like and the temperatures and so forth?
Well, the temperatures were cold. I don't remember. There was some warm part, and like in the spring it did get better, but very, very cold in the winter. And you slept in bunkers. You dug into the side of a mountain, and you enforced the top and the front as best you could, because there'd be incoming. And terrain was, I don't remember much of any level part. Everything was hills, pretty much on hills and mountains. And because we never stayed in one place too long, then we moved to another area, another hill, another mountain, another area. At one point we spelled the Army was in a certain area where they had been played. We went in, and so that they could come back and they would get some R&R back someplace. I never had R&R myself, but at one point when I got down and they knew that before I knew that I'd be coming home soon, that they took me off from what I had been doing with the flamethrower, and I got driving an ambulance, which was a Jeep with a couple of stretchers in the back. And one time I did have to take a couple officers back to Seoul, and that's where a lot of them were, by this time, were doing R&R back in Seoul, and then that was about the only time I got back there. Let's see, when I did leave Korea, I went out the same place I went in. I went out of Incheon, boarded a Navy ship, and I come home from there.
Were you always able to have supplies, the ammunition and all that you needed? Were there times when it was kind of scary?
No, not like what I read today in the wars today, where sometimes we always had everything we needed. And I know on that slip of paper that I filled out about our equipment compared to theirs, and I said ours was better. We always had plenty of equipment. There was never any problems there.
What about meal times? Were there times you had to live on rations solely, or?
Pretty much all the time that I was there. About the only time I remember a meal, like at Thanksgiving, they did, however they did it by helicopters, got some turkey dinners or with dressings, and I remember eating mine out of a cardboard box, but it was, and amazingly it was warm. And I thought it was quite an undertaking that they did get this up to the front lines to get you to have a dinner, which was pretty good. There was another time, though, I'm mentioning certain things. The Army seemed to be living better than we did. We didn't have any frills at all. I mean, not even showers. You washed out of your helmet, and the best you could. And if you heated up the water, then you also saved some to shave by. But I can remember we had a Lieutenant Finney was platoon, and I saw him one day, and he was all clean. His clothes were clean. I asked him, I said, "How'd you do that?" He said, "Well, for a short time I was a soldier, and down below us was an Army, and they had showers." So he just took off his lieutenant's bars, and he just went down there and got in line with it. So then he didn't tell us to do it, but he told us how it could be done, which we did.
You tried it then.
And we became, at the time, there was a time we became known as Finney's Fighters, because he was a young lieutenant. He was good, a nice guy.
Let's say the officer spirit and the enlisted spirit, they meshed well together?
Yeah, I would say so, because mainly, especially only from what my seeing was in the Marine Corps over there, the officers didn't live any better than we did. I mean, they lived in the bunkers the same way as we did. And I did know when we come out, when I did get out and got discharged in San Diego, I was on my way home. I flew home on military planes. I was going to save the money from discharge so I could buy a motorcycle when I got home. And little did I know I'd spend most of the money before I got home, because these military planes didn't go direct from there to Albany. And I went to New Mexico, and there was an Air Force base there when we landed, and they said, "We'll go on down to the chow hall and get something to eat." I went down, and here was round tables, chairs around, with napkins, silverware. I thought, holy crap. I thought I was walking into the Hotel Astor.
Yeah.
And I said, I think I got in the wrong outfit somehow. So I'm sure there's guys, though, that was in the Air Force or Army too, that had many bad things too, but I never saw any of that. I told my cousin, Willard Osterhout, the picture that's out here on the board shows me in dress blues. Well, it's only from the waist up. And that was taken in Parris Island just before I went to. And what they did, I went there in my khakis, boondockers, the whole thing. They just took off the top. They had this one dress blue with a pin in it. They pinned it around your neck. There you sat, and they had a white hat. You could or could not, and they just stuffed paper in it to make it fit your head. And there you were. Sent it home to your parents. Well, my mother thought that was so nice, me and my dress blues.
Were you able to get mail and
Yeah,
communicate
yes.
with home and all?
Yes, it was.
Did they do any censoring of your mail?
That I don't know. I really don't know. But I wrote home, and I used to get mail. Now, you'd go long periods of time before they'd have a mail call, but that certainly was always a nice part of your day to get letters and go back somewhere.
Were you subject to any propaganda from the enemy side?
Yes.
What was it like?
Well, some of it I have on display out there that I had sent down with my cousin. They sent these Merry Christmas folders. I think some are out there. Another one I can remember they sent or showed somebody's wife back home, a wife, and a strange man, and they would say, "Do you know what your wife is doing back home while you're over here cold, fighting a war that none of us want?" All sorts of things like that, you know. They sent out quite a lot of that type of a thing. And I don't know. There isn't too much more. I was trying to think if there was any nicer things I could tell you, any lighter sides, but probably the part about the mess hall and not being able to go overseas would be, there was one other thing. I said it was very cold, and we did have, you'd have to go on watch, and they have what they called 4 hours on and 4 hours off, 24 hours a day. So you would only sleep 4 hours and you were right back out again. Well, at night, it was so cold, but you had ponchos that covered all of you. And somewheres, a truck had dropped a box of, or case of these sterno cans. That's what you would cook your food over, the rations. So I got a whole bunch of them, and I took them back and hid them. And when I would go out on night patrol, I could take about 2 of those, and I could put them underneath my poncho and light them, and it could keep me warm. But God help me if I'd ever caught my poncho on fire, or, you know. And also I had to make sure that the poncho stayed down to where the light wouldn't show. But I think about that. I had lots of them, and they sure helped me get through some of those nights when it was so cold.
Did you hear about the progress of the war, how it was going? And what were the feelings of the men?
The one thing, when I mentioned Pam and John, we knew that they were having peace treaties were going there with both sides supposedly would meet. And we were quite some ways away, but as I said, and the shooting was still going on. But we would see the helicopters fly in, and sometimes they wouldn't be there more than like a half an hour, and they'd be flying out, and we'd be saying, they couldn't have signed anything in a half an hour, and that went on for a long time, and it got very discouraging. You just thought, I don't know what they're doing, but they're certainly not going that well. And,
were there occasions when you had to take any prisoners?
yeah.
What was it like? How did they react?
They didn't seem bitter. Maybe they felt they're going to be eating better or even sleeping better. I don't know. But we would usually just take them in big groups and line them up and march them out. But our part was only getting to a certain point, and then I wouldn't see them anymore. And they would try to, if you weren't looking, they'd try to steal your gloves or something like that. But then I couldn't get too upset over that because they had to be just as cold as we were. There was the bad parts. I can remember sitting down by myself to eat some K rations, and as I was just getting this hamburger and gravy out and this can, I started to eat, and I looked, and there was an arm sticking up out of the ground right about next to me, and that was the end of my lunch, and I assume it was a Korean, but and we had to get a lot of the dead bodies, and I remember just throwing them up in a truck like it'd be throwing bags of wheat or whatever, and they'd take them off and go. So as I said, I don't have too much more to say. There was the bad things that I do remember, things that I feel bad about that we had to do over there, and but probably the only thing is I wasn't very proud of, but the only thing I can say, I'm proud to be a Marine. Mm-hmm. And that's about it. I don't have much more to say.
Now, how did, then what did you do when you were discharged? Where did you go, and how has it influenced your life?
Well, I was discharged in San Diego, and again, my friend Duncan Reagan from Delmar ended up on that same ship coming home. We got discharged, and we came home together, and I didn't see too much of him after we got out. Jerry Solomon got out about the same time, and so he and I went off to school at St. Lawrence, and I didn't stay there very long, and I think I was asked to leave, and came home, and then in 1954 I met my wife Nancy and got married. My father and his 2 brothers owned a bar and restaurant up on the New Salem Hill. It was called Osterhout, and I was tending bar, and I saw this girl sitting at the bar, and I thought she was the greatest thing in the world. And I used to go up and wipe the bar off and empty the ashtray till finally her date said to me, "Why don't you go on back down where you're supposed to be?" And he says, "Because I got another one just like her at home." Nancy was a twin. I didn't know that. That was Patsy, her sister. And next Saturday night, here comes this girl again. I said, this Patsy's out with a different guy. Found out it was Nancy, talked to her, asked her if she'd like to go to a stock car race, and from there on was history. We
Rest
got
is
married.
history.
Yeah.
Now, this Gerald Solomon you referred to, this is the congressman from our area,
Yes.
and from whom the Stratton Hospital, no,
National
not
Cemetery.
the National
Cemetery.
Cemetery
Yes.
is named for.
I did go up and visit that after Jerry died. He was the best man at my wedding, Nancy and my wedding, and we were close friends. And when he was in Washington, we talked quite a lot, back and forth on telephone. By this time, I was in Florida. By this time, Nancy and I moved to Florida, and so one time we were coming back up from Florida to visit here, and I talked to Jerry on the phone. He said, "Why don't you stop in Washington and see me?" So we did, and we toured the White House, and we sat in. He was chairman of either Ways or Means of some committee, but we sat in and watched what they did. And then we went to dinner with he and Frida at the Congressman Club. But he wasn't going to run again, and he told me, and I couldn't understand why, because he was running unopposed here. He was very popular, but I think he knew then that he had cancer, but he just didn't say. And so we come on home. Of course, it wasn't long after that he died.
So, did you ever go back to any reunions or join any military organizations or anything?
Well, I belong to the American Legion of Voorheesville and the VFW in Altamont, but I really don't participate much. I'm guilty of that. It's a shame. I was talking to Bob about it outside. There was a picture on the wall of the Second World War of a parade down Main Street in Voorheesville. It was all big, long parade. And now these posts can't even get enough people in the posts to have a parade. They're not showing, so they're taking in fellows that weren't even in the service, and which I don't blame, just to keep the post going. And it's just changing at times.
Okay, well, this has been interesting, and we thank you for sharing your experiences with
Okay.
us, and also for serving our country.